I'll just go ahead and start with getting it set up. It's an honor to be here among my betters who are actually making things. I'm a commenter. None of my feature-length screenplays that I've written have been made, but maybe one day. This talk is a sort of rare opportunity, I think, to garner disagreement from every party in the room. I had sort of like a conservative way to take it and a more provocative way to take it, and I thought it'd be better to create conversation than consensus. So I hope that you have comments in addition and critiques in addition to, I'm sure, good questions for these folks. So my thesis today is simple, that Kung Fu Panda and the first film and Oz the Great and Powerful are nihilist fairy tales, a new sort of post-Christian myth cut from a cloth that I will try to define. And they're specifically not cynical or existential, despairing nihilist stories. Those are reserved for art house tragedies, but a new form of myth that cheerfully embraces a particular kind of nothingness. So first thing I'm going to do is try to define, I'm going to define what I mean by nihilist. I think that's going to be the hard part and the greatest likelihood for confusion. And then I'll show how Kung Fu Panda and Oz the Great and Powerful fall under that description. And then I will indulge in some speculation as to why these came about, the sort of dilemma that created a new form of myth, and just predict that we'll see more films in this pattern. If my prediction's right, then you can test it scientifically at home. Just wait a couple years and be like, that guy was wrong. Now, I'm not a film scholar, okay, so I'm sort of speculating as an amateur, I'm not a fairy tale scholar. I've been reading I read the Grimm fairy tales entirely, the whole big book, you know, and Arabian Nights, and I'm working my way through Hans Christian Andersen and Andrew Lang's Book of Colors. These are sort of like the source material for Disney, Pixar, Leica now, they're making their own, I guess, and DreamWorks. And so, of course, I had to write a few fairy tales to get that out of my system. So I'm speaking as an inside amateur. And my doctoral research is in ethics, so take that for what you will. But I'm very interested in nihilism. The 4 feature scripts that my writing partner and I have written three of them are about vampires. And so they're all explicitly about nihilism. And then the one that I wrote is a sort of an action film about atomic bombs. And it's about moral nihilism. So the term nihilism is used in philosophy to apply to moral error theorists who say that there are no objective values. Literally, it just means nothingism, right? Which isn't a very helpful term, nihilism, nothingism. It's used of epistemological skepticism who say there's no knowledge or there's nothing to be known. It's used of existentialists, perhaps most often, who say that there is no meaning or purpose to our life. There's no human nature to define what success looks like. And so I think there's a danger that we could just sort of talk about that. And so I'm going to follow Eugene Seraphin Rose. He defines nihilism out of Nietzsche's mouth is the proposition that there is no truth. There is no truth. That's what I mean by nihilistic fairy tales in which the point of the story is there is no truth. But there's, and this is from the book of an Orthodox monk. It's very painful. I was recommending to Caleb this book that he read it because it's one of the most painful books I've read in the last 10 years. And he said that's a glowing recommendation. But there's 2 movements to nihilism. Suppose there's no truth. What do we do about it? What's our reaction? The first reaction is to despair and to say, all of our beliefs are false. We can't believe anything with justification. We can't do anything for a good reason. And so life becomes anxious and sort of just despairing and dark, right? And this is the subject of plenty of films. But the second sort of corollary is, well, anything that I believe isn't false. If there's no truth, then nothing I could believe would be false. If there's no truth, nothing I could do would be wrong. Wrong with respect to what? And so I'm focusing on the cheerful nihilism. Sartre and Camus say there's no truth, there's no meaning, so all is absurd, and the proper response is horror and sadness. And Donald Crosby and Slavoj Žižek have what Karen Carr calls cheerful nihilism. There's no truth, therefore we are free. There's nothing to limit us. And so the proper response is creativity, vitality, joy, and hope. And this form of nihilism, as opposed to, say, a pre-Christian nihilism like a Buddhism, is very different. I think it's parasitic on Christianity in a way that I'll try to make clear. It's a negation of the Christian revelation. It's not an emptiness like a womb, it's an emptiness like a tomb. Slavoj Žižek puts his sort of view in stark terms, and this is identical to what Seraphim Rose basically argues in his book. But this is from Zizek, the movie Pervert's Guide to Ideology. Quote, "The message of Christ is, I'm dying, but my death itself is good news. It means you are alone, left to your freedom. Be in the Holy Spirit, which is just the community of believers. The only way to be an atheist is to go through Christianity." Unquote. So the good news of Christianity is not the resurrection of Christ, it's the death of Christ. There is no big other, you're on your own. As a church, go ahead and define your meaning and purpose. Okay, so contrast, how is this parasitic on the Christian fairy tale? In my first draft, I talked a lot about Christian fairy tales, and so I took all that out, but I'll just say that a Christian fairy tale, a Christian story, maybe a Christian film, this could be applied, is cut from the cloth of the true story of the Incarnation. And so I summarize any fairy tale that fits within a larger meta-narrative that pulls from that meta-narrative, even if it's not about Jesus or about redemption or about anything like that. If it follows the pattern, it can be, in my view, Christian. What is that pattern? The most concise way I can put it is incarnation of the Logos. So the Logos is what created, and the world is logical. Sin and error and confusion and darkness are what? Separation and spurning the Logos. Hope is the promise of the Logos, and still we have the presence of the Logos even in that darkness. Redemption is reunification with the Logos in the Incarnation, reunification of human beings to the incarnate Christ. What is the end of all things? Recreation of the Logos in the world according to the pattern of the Logos that was in the beginning. That is the true story, if you will. And any story that's cut from that cloth, like Little Briar Rose, or Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, and we can sort of go through and track points on that pattern and see how Little Briar Rose follows the same shape. And just about all of the Grimm fairy tales you could sort of do this with, even the ones that are really ugly or have violence or things like that. I think they're still Christian in some sense. Okay, so all that to say, how is Kung Fu Panda nihilistic? Kung Fu Panda grossed $500 million worldwide, okay? And it's about Po, the fat panda. He's overweight, and that's one of the themes of the movie, is that he's very unfit to be a Kung Fu master. Overcoming Tai Lung by becoming the Dragon Master. I think it's Dragon Master is the wrong term. Dragon Warrior, I believe, is supposed to be what it's called. Well, there's a prophecy that says the Dragon Warrior will arise. Po is just a noodle chef. Has anyone not seen the film? Has everyone seen the film? Ish. Po is a noodle chef, and he wants to be a dragon, he wants to be a Kung Fu master, and eventually gets trained, but nobody believes that he is the dragon master except for his sensei. Now, the secret is to read the dragon scroll. Okay, this is the kind of MacGuffin of the movie. If you can read the dragon scroll, it gives you, quote, the secret of limitless power, unquote. And only the dragon master can read it. And that's the only way he's going to defeat Tai Lung, who is really good at Kung Fu. At the moment of truth, at the end, despite Poe's sort of seeming unworthiness, his master says, "You're ready to read the scroll." He opens it up. 1,000 years of gurus hiding the secret turns out to have all been a lie. The scroll is blank. Okay, now immediately you want to say, well, all those gurus were charlatans. They were preserving a secret, namely that there is no secret. They were what some people view as Roman Catholic priests, preserving the truth that Jesus never rose from the dead, that kind of mythology. They're sort of Gnostic priests who are guarding the absence of anything to guard. Well, of course, Poe is crushed, and he says, Tai Lung is coming, so we're all going to die. But he gets it when he goes to talk to his adopted dad, Mr. Ping, who owns the noodle soup store. And the secret ingredient to the noodle soup that he's made his money off of, Mr. Ping says, quote, "The secret ingredient is nothing." And Poe says, "Huh?" And he says, there's no secret, there's no special sauce or something. And Mr. Ping says, "Don't have to. To make something special, you just have to believe it's special." And then Poe looks down at this moment. This is the perfect moment. And he says, "There is no secret ingredient." So realizes that there is no secret ingredient, but our collective belief that the soup is special makes it special. There is no dragon warrior, and so his knowledge that there's no dragon warrior empowers him to be whatever he wants to be. If he wants to be the dragon warrior, great. And so he goes and fights Tai Lung and uses his fatness actually as a weapon against the lean cat and wins. Okay, so there's a similar pattern in Oz the Great and Powerful, where the key moment, nothingness itself, saves the day. Oscar Diggs is a circus magician and con man, and this film is somewhat faithful to the source material, Frank Baum's 13 Oz books that most people haven't read. Oscar Diggs is a magician who goes to the magical land of Oz, and through a pun on his name, that they've been expecting a wizard named Oz to save them from the Wicked Witch. And at first, he's like, great, I'm going to be able to con this whole people and get the throne and get the gold and get the girls. And he eventually comes to sort of have compassion on them and actually save them from the Wicked Witch through a mixture of science and showbiz. He knows he's not the wizard, but he's used to being a fraud, and so he pretends to be the wizard, and it turns out that's just what they need. In the trailer, you actually have Glinda, the good witch, responding to him. He says, "I may not actually be the wizard," and she says that they don't know that. So she's part of this Gnostic circle that knows there's no secret, and that's the very thing that's going to save us, is your sort of belief in yourself. Admittedly unjustified belief. So I think there's three sort of patterns here. The Christian pattern, and this could apply to even pre-Christian films, I think, or stories, is God is real, there's hope, and so let's rejoice. A Christian fairy tale, whether there's a God in it or not, it might have, there's a Savior coming who's real. The Savior comes, and it ends happily ever after. The cynical nihilist is God is fictional, there's no hope, so let us despair. And I think that's honest. The Dragon Master is a fiction. It was all fraud. There is no hope. Tai Lung is going to kick all of our butts. The pattern I'm trying to capture is the post-Christian cheerful nihilist. God is fictional, there is no hope, therefore let us rejoice. There's no wizard of Oz. Great. I'll just pretend to be him and get the same thing done. And so I think if we were going to, we've been talking about what makes a film Christian, it might help to look at the opposite extreme. What makes a film non-Christian? It's not that there's no gospel. That could be pre-Christian in a way that sets up the gospel. What makes a film non-Christian or anti-Christian is that there's a false gospel. There is once we realize there's no Savior coming and there's no God, we step into the role of our own Savior and our own God. That seems to be far more opposed or removed from the gospel than just saying life is hard, it's meaningless, we're going to die, it hurts, no, it's hard. That's it. Daniel's story, just to talk about nihilism a little bit, says that those two movements are both part of nihilism. Number one, there is no objective meaning. And number two, my own subjective meaning is omnipotent. There's nothing to contradict or deny me. And so it becomes a kind of like self-deception is, and Nietzsche says this, if you hate lies, but if you don't think there's any truth, but you still aren't willing to lie to yourself, you still love truth. You have to be willing to lie to yourself to get rid of Christianity. And so that's what these are, is let's deceive ourselves because there's nothing to contradict us. And so just to sort of spell it out, these are tentative examples of other film, stage plays, and comic books that might fit into my categories. A Christian film that has nothing to do with God or Messiah is Wall-E. The salvation in Wall-E is just ourselves. Man saves himself, but it's by coming back to human nature. And that's, to me, what makes it not nihilistic. There is such a thing as human nature. We have to work within the boundaries of our nature because it exists, and we don't get to define it. Wicked, following Rebecca, I don't know if you guys heard Rebecca Hayes, her talk where she talked about Maleficent actually reaffirming Christian morality. I agree with that. Wicked and Maleficent talk about the anti-hero, but fundamentally reaffirm what it means to be wicked. And that Elphaba, the Wicked Witch of the West, turns out to just be a Christ figure. She's actually good. Surprise! But goodness is still goodness. And then Fables, the graphic novel, volume 10, is just an awesome story and very Christian. Cynical nihilist, you've got Monty Python, Sweeney Todd, and Watchmen for a graphic novel, which are very explicit about, since there's no hope, let's just sort of despair. And then the cheerful nihilist, Waking Life. I don't know if anyone's seen that. It's a great film, one of my favorites. But it's sort of just like, if life is a dream, then hey, we can create ourselves. That's cool. Godspell, I think, is following the stage play. I think is following this pattern pretty well. Jesus dies, and then that's the good news. And then the Christians come together and say, let's build a beautiful city. We can build a beautiful city. And then Fables, volume 13, Bill Willingham dismantles everything he's done. And I would call that a little nihilistic. So I think that, to finish up here, in the future that we will see more films cut from this cloth, where the hero has to know that there's no hope to give people hope. The hero has to lie and even self-deceive in order to deceive others, and somehow that turns out well. I don't think it's rational, but I hope you can see the pattern. And the tension is between stories like that and stories that are made by non-Christians, maybe viewed by non-Christians, loved and reviewed by non-Christians, who are still enjoying the Christian momentum of the Grimm fairy tales, and that Disney is recycling, even with their weird, fun, subversive changes. So my guess is we'll see Disney and Pixar, Disney stick closer to the Christian fairy tale. Pixar is doing its own thing, but it's still very Christian. And maybe some of these other studios like DreamWorks and Laika being willing to branch out and speak to the audience who's in imagination maybe still baptized, but not in worldview or life. But that's something that sort of remains to be seen, and of course we can reverse this trend by persuading ourselves and our culture that if we're overweight spiritually, like, oh, that's not going to turn out well for us. We actually have to repent and believe, because the kingdom of God is at hand. Thank you.
We do have time for some questions then, if you have some.
I hope this picture inspires our Q&A time. It should be very competitive.
I guess I have a question. My question is a little underformed, but I'll try to be controversial. No, so I am curious about the. I don't even quite know how to start, but the critique of I guess of Nietzsche in particular, but of nihilism in general, that kind of locates itself in the problem of self-deception. Seems like it'd be, and what I mean by that is sort of, if nihilism as you're describing equals there is no truth, the sort of, probably the most classic formulation of it is Wittgenstein's On Certainty, where he argues that, every doubt requires a whole set of, he's talking about language and use of language, and he says that all the doubts require a whole bunch of things that you actually hold to be unquestionably true while you're doubting those. And I mean, there's various versions of this in continental philosophy in the last 50 years, but basically the critique went something like, if you say there's no truth, the problem is that you're saying something. Well, Bright Eyes, Connor Rivers puts it best. You say there's no truth, how can you say it like you're right?
Yeah.
So obviously that, of course, then gets picked up by, just to continue with history of philosophy, with pragmatism and the question of how much is your actions what you believe, and then the question becomes, I think for these films, is how much are they actually committed to, I mean, you're creating a distinction that I don't disagree with on the one hand, but how much can you actually be committed to the idea that I know it's false that I'm the Messiah, but I posit my messianism despite the fact that there's, an emptiness there. And so you have in the Lego movie him seeing the cat poster that says believe, and you have Ping saying, there's no secret, and that's the secret. And I love the photo you chose, because obviously, imagistically, it shows Poe seeing himself. So, that's the secret, is that you're the image. But of course, there's a whole another way of reading that too, right? I mean, he's the image of the image. You brought up logos already, so in one sense, there's a couple different ways you can push back on this. One is this performative contradiction of saying that there's no truth, and that's one kind of problem. The other would be something like, these all seem to posit a kind of messianism located in the individual, which you could read again as a kind of secular humanist, or you could read it as, no, we're all full of the image, and it's a recapitulation of the Christian narrative, just at a kind of more postmodern and parodic level. So I mean, those are two different challenges to the nihilist thesis, I guess. One more philosophical, the other more, I guess, theological in some sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the first one, the after an ellipsis, Nietzsche says there is no truth, there is no thing in itself. So I think he's talking about truth in a substantive sense, not truth in a propositional sense. He didn't have time to distinguish. There is no objective reality, as Daniel's story says. There is no objective order. That's nihilism. And then our human sort of response to that is, well, then there's no meaning to my life, because I'm not part of anything. So I think that when you put it in that sense, yes, the phrase, the proposition, it's a truth value of true, because it's about this nothingness, that's really there. And so it is a kind of I think it is a paradox at bottom, and that's part of what makes it irrational. And so I would say thoroughgoing nihilists like Nietzsche, God bless him, go insane. It wasn't just the horse that made him go insane, and maybe he recovered in his insanity, right? I hope that happened. But it's irrational at base if you really go for it. The second part of that, believing in yourself and believing that you're a Messiah is kind of weirdly iconographically true insofar as you're an image of God who is the Messiah. I think it's a really good point, and I don't know if these movies, I'd be interested in reanalyzing these movies from that perspective. is there something about Poe that that's true of him, he just didn't see it yet. And I think that audiences demanded that kind of reading from the films. When you look at the second movie, Poe becomes an awesome kung fu master. It's no longer just believing in yourself, it's actually being good at it. Because there's objective rules to kung fu, right? So, I think that's interesting. I need to account for that. Thank you.
Well, I have a question, but I do see that belief in self. I mean, when I saw that image and I remember this film, my thought is not the nothing, but it is obviously, he sees his reflection. And so that's become something culturally just, for me, the best moment of seeing this in our culture was actually, I was at my mother-in-law's house and it was at Christmas time, and it was she had Deal or No Deal on. And the man literally was at the top monetarily. And he just kept saying, you've got to believe to receive, over and over, right? And all we kept seeing was his money go down. I mean, he left with pennies, right? But I think that's the thing, is there's culturally an identity of, you could say, messianism, belief in, you can see the connection to logos incarnated, but it's different, because if you really look at look at the world wars of the last century, and you see when we really are confronted with the self, it is not logos incarnated. It really isn't. We can lie to ourselves, but it isn't. So I think that's the main problem. And that's why I do see what you're saying, because in the Lego movie and all these things, it's always the cat poster believe, but in what? And I came to the same thing in kind of what I was studying and spoke about today. April, my question to you would be that redemptive endings bit, because being in a place where we're always telling stories, I teach acting. We teach at the same school, actually. And so everyone always comes to us and they don't like that. I guess before I was there, they only ever did musicals. Like it was the Oklahoma and hi everyone, we're always nice. And so I didn't even realize that someone who's in charge of faith integration at our school has real issue with all the plays we do because they're not quote unquote redemptive. So he didn't even like Amadeus. Even though I strangely find that redemptive, even though maybe it doesn't tie a bow on it. So what is it in us that wants to tie a bow on the redemptive ending? And can redemption be there even if it's not clearly there in the story? Can we be redeemed even if the story isn't redemptive, or even if the people in the story don't get redeemed? What is redemption in the story?
That question just made me think about, I heard a presentation today.
We all blend together.
It was one of them.
About the cross and how the cross is the cross in and of itself, like the crucifixion is redemptive. I think that was this morning. Someone talked about the fact that the crucifixion in and of itself, like that is like not that is the story, not that it ends there, but that is redemptive, like the cross itself. And I feel like we often want to jump to the resurrection. We want to skip the cross. You know what I'm saying? Like we want to skip that part that hurts. But in actuality, that is why we're here. That's why we have a faith. That's why, you know what I mean? It's the cross.
Yeah.
And again, that's not to negate the resurrection, but that at its core, that is the essence of why the resurrection exists. So I think I don't know. I don't know why we have gravitated onto this resurrection or this redemption. Like it has to look a certain way, and I do feel like it has something. I haven't flushed this out, so I don't know for sure, but I do feel like it has some type of tie-in with how we even see our own Christian story. How we look at the crucifixion and how we look at the resurrection and what we see the value. Do we see the value in both of those things? I think there's value in both, but we tend to just go, oh, Jesus rose. It's like, yeah, but there were days prior to that where, where he died. There was a day where it was silent. There was a Good Friday. It's like we skip Good Friday. We skip Saturday. You know, it's Good Friday, and then there's Easter. It's like, what happened Saturday?
Oh, yeah.
What was that like? It's like we're just waiting, just sitting there. I mean, Savior just was crucified. Like, what do we do with that? Like, I think we're really uncomfortable with that uncertainty. It's like we always want to, yeah. I think even in our own story, we want to tie that up. You know, we want to get to the
There's
resurrection.
potential maybe you could stay in the cross in your film, and the audience might get the resurrection.
I think so. I think there is that potential, and I mean, I would advocate for that just because, personally, most of the films that I'm mostly affected by are those films that stay right there in the crucifixion, where they're on Saturday, and if you're just like, what? Like, you know what I mean? But those are the films that cause that, you know, after the film is over, you go and you discuss, and they leave me going, man, what does that mean? Like, I feel like for me, those are the films that have the most impact because they leave me with something, and they don't wrap it up. They just leave me with questions, and they leave me with thoughts. They're questions that I want to say, hey, did you think, have you ever thought about, you know? And to me, that's powerful. And I think there's room for both, but I would like to see us kind of shift more in that direction of Friday and Saturday, you know, the crucifixion and the waiting. So I think there is potential for that.
Yes.
Does anyone else have for?
Go ahead.
This is for Mark, but actually it kind of touches on your point. And the phrase I think of when you're talking is like an over-realized eschatology. You know, that there's this sense of jumping from, I don't know who I stole that from, but it's definitely not mine. But I stole it from somebody a long time ago, and I used it enough times, it's mine now. But anyway, like that, and it's a part of what I think, Mark, you're starting with is Christian films as opposed to Christian films. Seems like in part is what's being critiqued is as much as anything a kind of theological frame, and I think oftentimes those films, like you mentioned, the guy yesterday mentioned, the guy this morning mentioned too, God is Not Dead, and Fireproof, and both of them kind of include that, you know, I mean, there's definitely in Fireproof a kind of Saturday, I mean, he has his problems and stuff, but then it all gets tied up. So that's not my question, Mark. just thought that was a good point. But then I did want to ask you about, you know, I assume that the people you're referring to, Vision and others, that you kind of put this on in sort of social justice kind of realm. Is that? I mean, it's not just documentary. Like I haven't seen it, so I'm asking you this. And I'm curious. It's interesting to me to think about how does the sort of market concerns and monetizing that go, and how do you think through that relative to the to the justice imperative? I mean, did you guys spend time? I think you said you made it with students too, so I was curious how you talk to them. Obviously, there'd be a couple of easy ways, like you know, we have to get the message out, and so it needs to be marketable and interesting. But then there's always that danger of we need to make other people's suffering. I remember when I was in documentary photography, and we talk about how Jake Reese and other people really wrestled with what does it mean to make beautiful art out of somebody else's suffering, and how does I'm asking because you're practical. How do you deal with it with students? Like luckily I'm in literature now, so I don't have to do that anymore. But I have to ask that question too.
That's a good question. I mean, you can make docs where you say, let me tell you about them. Right? This one we made where we're going to let them tell you about them. Right? So, did we cash in on people's misery? That's something we talked about a lot. I don't think we did. We were very concerned about monetizing this film because I've seen enough Christian filmmakers who have great ideas and then they go broke. And then there's no more follow-up. So how do we monetize our projects so that we can make the next project, and make the next project, and make the next project? We also built right into the system that part of the proceeds were going to go back to the people we featured in the film. So that has helped lift them to, they're still in poverty, but a lesser degree of poverty. So yeah, those are things we talked about a lot. And also, this idea of do we steer away from tough subjects because they're tough subjects? And you've probably all been in presentations over the last few days where we're saying, no, as Christians we've got to get in there in the thick of talking about there's 1 billion people tripling by 2050. So that's 3 billion people living in slums, and the social powder keg that's going to be. So this is something that not a lot of people are talking about and maybe don't know a lot about. So we wanted to shine a really bright light on this and get a discussion going. That was the purpose. That's why there's no call to action. It's an informative piece, entertaining and informative, hopefully, to get people talking about this. And we felt that that was a service that we could provide as believers because it springs right from our faith. Now, the next film, I'll just throw this in there, and maybe you guys can give me some wisdom on this. The next film that we hope to start soon is on the persecuted church. Christians are the most persecuted religious group on earth, easily. And that too is one of those subjects that not a lot of people are talking about, and not a lot of people know about. So we want to shine a really bright light on it. The trick with that one is, how do we make a film like that in such a way that PBS or Discovery Channel says, yeah, we want that? Because that's going to be a really tough one to not come across as, oh, we're Christians grinding an axe because you're all picking on us, right? So kind of that same idea, I think, of trying to, coming from our faith, telling difficult stories to get other people talking about them, believers or not. I don't know if I answered your question at all, but that's those were some of the things that we were working through, trying to find balance in the creation of this thing. Yeah.
Keith, I also am a reader and a fan of Father Seraphim Rose. I was just wondering if, before he died, if he had written anything about this kind of optimistic nihilism movement, or if he maybe was not saying anything about that.
Oh no, I stole from him literally.
Did you?
That's all
Okay.
in the Nihilism, the Root of the Revolution of the Modern Age. It's free online.
Well, I read it, but I guess I missed that part.
He talks about it in pretty stark terms of like it is satanic, right? That it's a joy in rebellion and violence and destruction. And so I was abstracting away from the political side to see how could this fit into a kids movie. And that the movie is very violent, which I think Father Seraphim would wink at that, like, aha, that's not nihilism. Talks about creating when the self has been shown to be empty, and there's only 2 ways to create it to make yourself feel like you're not a ghost, violence and perverse sexual practice. And so it was a very interesting social read of why we like violence as a culture. But so it's like, well, in a movie like this, it couldn't have been an adventure film. It had to be a kung fu fighting film. I think Seraphim would say that because it's violent, But I would just reread the sections on the I forget which stage, the 3rd stage I think of nihilism, vitality. Could I say something in response to your question earlier about the sort of the easy, the resurrection thing? As I guess 2 things. I don't know how these connect. One is like that when our faith is weak, then the resurrection, has a potential to kill it. The crucifixion. Some of the disciples legitimately left, like maybe never to return. John and Mary Magdalene were there at the cross. Their faith was strong enough for the crucifixion. And so I think that we have to be sensitive to some of our own life, seasons, and some of our audience. It might be killed if I make a movie that's really about the crucifixion, so to speak. They need the resurrection, and so maybe that's what Fireproof is for. Is look, your faith is weak. We're going to pump it up a little bit. Isn't it great that God gives us earthly blessings, which He sometimes does? And then movies that are for the stronger in faith can go deeper into the pain of sanctification. And I was thinking about the sanctification salvation distinction too. That if you emphasize salvation, say I have minimal amounts of faith, I'm saved, and that's it. You don't emphasize sanctification. But my church tradition now, which is Orthodox, emphasizes sanctification a whole lot more. And so it's all about the gritty, cyclical, we're going to go through Easter weekend again. And that's really helped to strengthen my faith, because I don't sort of defer some of the eschatology.
Well, would that Oh, sorry, you're,
Well, I was just gonna say, and that's why I would say that I think that there's room for both. Like, I think that, you know, because I used to, you know, again, like when you say Christian film, but it's like, it does have a place, you know what I mean? But I do think that we kind of, the scale definitely tips in one direction, and particularly in terms of like what we make and what we, you know, as filmmakers, what we create and what we're allowed to create. You know, it's kind of like, you know, you're not allowed to create that. Like you can create a story that, you know, like you can create Fireproof, but you can't create, you know, whatever. So there's this question of like, is it okay for me to make that? You know, and you know, and this is also why I mentioned that about that song, that 4-word song. You know what I mean? Because it's like that O is like oh. I mean, I can't sing, so I didn't sing it, but I mean, it's like, oh, Jesus, you know? It's like, that's all you, sometimes when you're in the midst of it, sometimes you just need that camaraderie to say, oh yeah, I feel you. Oh, Jesus. And it's not that the problem is solved, but we're just acknowledging that pain that I feel in the moment. And I feel like, particularly in, you know, quote unquote Christian film, we're missing that. You know what I mean? So I agree with you. I think that there's room for both, and I think we need both because, you know, people are in different places. It's like, you know, I hear people a lot like, oh, you don't want to make another Fireproof, and it's like, well, Fireproof actually healed some marriages. Like, I know some people who are like, who will tell you hands down, that movie saved my marriage. That's cool. Like, I don't, you know what I mean? Like, I don't think it's helpful for us as a community to bash that. Do you know what I mean? But I also don't think it's helpful for us either to just completely neglect, you know, this other part of life that is very real.
Jump in. Go ahead. I was gonna jump in, but you had your hand up first.
oh no, I was just agreeing, and I think it's the setting that you're in. Sometimes in Christian circles, the setting goes so far the other way that you have to push the boundary, because when you train actors, you can't even say a tiny little potty word, because then it will make it unchristian art. And coming from an actor's perspective, it's ridiculous, because you just want to portray truth. It doesn't mean you have to portray truth to its utmost. But in Christian circles, we're fighting against Christian art always having to have the bow on it. That I like what you're saying, but I think that's why we struggle to push the other direction.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. Because I sat on a panel with Alex Kendrick, who made Fireproof and all those movies.
Yeah,
Great guy. We had a great time together. But we sat on a panel together, he and I, and the audience was maybe 70 people, very much in the camp of a film has to have the bow and it has to mention Christ, or we can't go see it. And Alex was, you know, he was preaching to the choir. I was pushing more from the direction a lot of you guys are coming from, where why can't we create art, you know, if all truth is God's truth, why can't we create art that speaks truth to a hurting world, even if we don't mention the Bible or whatever? And you can see some of the people starting to scratch their heads. It's the first time they'd thought about that, I think. So, you know, within our Christian circles, we have such a, like you just said, we have such a wide variety of perspectives on this. It depends really where you're coming from, and I think a huge part of our job as educators is helping folks understand that media can be messy because life is messy. And if our art reflects life and culture, our art can't be beautiful and glistening and full of sparkles all the time. So yeah, it depends on the audience and who you're talking to.
And that probably depends on how much you want to push back too.
Yeah, if you had a good night's sleep the day before, or exhausted, or
Well, I feel like I've experienced what you're talking about. I've experienced that with my students. Even, you know, I teach a film and social issues class, and you know, a lot of the films that tend to deal with social issues they can be kind of tough to watch. And so so it's just like, you know, well, I can't watch that because X, Y, Z. And you know, I never want to be that teacher that's like, you need to watch this, you know, rated R movie. I'm not trying to, you know, destroy anyone's walk with God at all. But at the same time, you know, I think that, and again, I keep coming back to, as filmmakers and as an educator, seeing students who, they know they don't want to make Christian films. And particularly you have people who come in. I was kind of like this. When I went to film school, it was like, like I said, I said in my presentation, I literally became a Christian 30 days before I decided I wanted to be a filmmaker. And it was like, what do I do with this? Because I'm a Christian and I want to make films that will make people see God or what have you. But I don't want to put a bow on it because life's hard. So what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? And so it became this tension between, can I make this and can I make that? Will the audience accept this? Will they not accept that? And so, for this audience, it's too Christian. For this audience, it's not Christian enough. So then what do I do with it? Is that okay? And there's just not a place. There wasn't a place for me. And so even now, I see students who, they know they don't want to make Fireproof. For whatever reason. They don't want to make Fireproof. So then it's like, but with my case, I knew I didn't want to make the standard Christian film with a bow on it. But I did want to challenge, I wanted to stir up some stuff. Even within the Christian community. So, you could kind of call it a Christian film, but it's not a Christian film with a bow on it. It's to tell the Christian community, we need to wake up on some things, was what I wanted to do. And so I was, at that time, I was very passionate about that. But that's what I came to the table with. I came to the table with a point of view and with a voice. And a lot of the students that I see, it's like, okay, I don't want to make Christian film, but then, what are you making films about? And because they don't have, whether you're telling a film about a particular social issue or whether you're telling about something within the Christian community, there's that fear of what's okay, what can I make? So then they end up making a film about, just like, something that's silly. And so it's like, let's dig a little deeper to see, what else you got in there. You know what I mean? So I think that, for me, it always comes back to that question of, it's very easy to have conversations about, like, yes, we should be making films that embrace the truth in all parts of life. But when it comes to actually sitting down and writing that out and creating that, it kind of opens up a new can of worms.
Let's thank our presenter for that.
I swear at my kids like that, but not everybody else. That's right.
I feel like Russian media since I teach film and you also.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for
Actually, the first two were happening. The middle was like the middle costs money to make this movie that's available. Then the right college, right? And it's just there. So that's what I was saying, that the community, not the Fridays. Sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh.
Now we see film text. That's like this and all this. He's never yet. Well, that was the question that you asked about.
It's like the little one.
Filming
Exactly.
It's
Just, I mean, everything up to stuff. Like, it's not like art.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah. We're not like
it's.
But
Then they make it big,
Right.
they make it a little bit.
I haven't seen it this topic actually.
Yeah.
It's kind of like,
Exactly.
where I was asking, where do you
It
think
does,
it
I
has?
think it's
It's
like
like
that.
that.
I think it's in the third. I talked to the basic.
But you actually challenge those values.
Okay.
The little bit.
Yeah.
I just see that.
But then I always feel awkward too. It's scary. I see that. This is very realistic. Like, I'm so easy to get. I can't do it.
It's so much better to buy.
What is it?
So how long exactly were you gonna be aware? So what do you?
I'm in one apartment. I live in neighborhood.
Honestly, that's what we want. It's looking at the same fact. There is no meaning.
No, I actually wrote that word yesterday.
Versus there is no meaning. I can believe whatever I want.
Well, then every day, but it could be the answer in my, I read that word in the book,
Yes, that's right, they do. Yeah, we actually connected with them. Yeah, they do. We actually connected with them when we were there. And they were good. They did a cool scene for us. This summer, it was in June. Mid-June.
My friend got fostered.
One nation under God, Congress added our national anthem of 56. Trying to make sure
Yeah.
So, right, that's what it is. Yeah. So for me, we have that guy, this is far from
Yeah, no, the same thing.
So that right there is.
God is in everything. Like, I'm part of something.
And then you do the conference. Yeah, exactly.
That's the point outside of the ocean. It's out there. Oh, my God.
That's the difference.
No, and you're right.
Yeah, I always want to give crack.
That's all there.
I know, that is always so hard.
In my class, well, I'm second year, I think.
I found it very fascinating.
Yeah. I want to really get the
I'm glad. Thank you. Well, the one thing I want to say about your Christians and for your ministry is words school name it's my proof text. It's my body.
Yes, I do know what Jesus said that.
I don't know if it's so all places are that's actually it's very paraphrastic. The worst thing is wrong is like it's strong it's strong maximizes crap.
You know what I mean?
And it's like,
I actually
my mind wrestles with
changed my life, so but not necessarily for the better. I'll never forget that.
You don't want to scandalize. We are all that class.
Well, I guess the truth is we are all.
Right. I also know that scandalize or I had to grow in.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, it does.
It's come to love it.
Yes, I started doing that. I started doing that. That's right. And I had the same one. Yes, actually. I studied so many others for the job.
I just started doing that. Yeah, I just started doing that this semester. And I was trying to figure out whether I wanted it because, like, you know, I had to watch, well, I had to watch it.
Wasn't scandalized.
And then they came back.
Although like now.
Like, side they didn't understand film, and so I had to
I was too.
I too, I'm running out of paper. I look at the film.
Thank you.
They need